Hey guys, Dimension Master Studios here. How y'all doing? So when it comes to Ninjago, we've gotten a lot of reoccurring characters over the years. Characters like Dareth, Pixel, Ronin, etc. And when it comes to these characters, we've seen a lot of things happen with them over the years, with them growing and changing in various ways. And as a result of that, they've become some fan favorite characters when it comes to the fan base. That being said, though, in today's video, I want to take a look at one reoccurring character in particular who, despite making numerous appearances over the events of the show, I'd honestly argue hasn't really gotten that much to do, and at the same time has a lot of missed potential. With that character obviously being Skylor. So in today's video, I want to take a look at Skylor, discuss all the stuff that we've gotten with her over the years, and discuss again her missed potential. So let's get into this whole thing. So Skylor made her debut all the way back during Season 4 Tournament of Elements, where we saw that Skylor was initially one of the other competitors in the tournament, as well as being Kai's love interest. We also see during the season that Skylor has access to the elemental power of Amber, giving her the ability to replicate elemental powers. And can I just say, I genuinely think that now, 10 years later, Amber is still one of the most interesting and creative elemental powers that we've ever gotten, because I feel like the ability to replicate other elemental powers is something that's really, really unique when it comes to Ninjago. And I honestly feel like despite all the other powers that we've been introduced to over the years, I honestly don't think any of them are more creative than Amber. It's something that I think is honestly pretty interesting. So anyway, when it comes to Skylor, initially she, just like the other Elemental Masters, were against the ninja and were competing against them in the Tournament of Elements. However, during the Thunderblade match, Skylor and a bunch of the other Elemental Masters ultimately decided to side alongside the ninja, and they all decided to work together against Chen, forming an alliance. However, that alliance was short-lived because, as it turns out, one of the Elemental Masters was actually a spy and secretly working for Chen. And as it turns out, Skylor was actually the spy because she was actually Chen's daughter. Which, once again, I think this is honestly something really interesting, especially considering that at this point in the show, we had never seen something like this before. A side character being related to a major antagonist for the season. Yes, technically there was Lloyd back during season 1, but he wasn't really a side character during that season. He was still a main character, and he eventually ended up joining the ninja team and became the overall main character of the show. So again, I'm not really counting Lloyd here, but still, when it comes to Skylor, I think it is honestly really interesting seeing her being the daughter of Chen, again, a major antagonist for an Ninjago season. And even though we've gotten a lot of characters after Skylor who are in that exact same position, she was still technically the first character to be in this position, which again I do think is honestly pretty interesting, and I feel like this did lead to some interesting things with Skylor later on during the season. So anyway, Skylor and Chen were working together, with Skylor doing whatever she could in order to sabotage the Elemental Alliance and prevent them from doing anything against Chen, with her being able to successfully divide the Elemental Masters. However, things would end up changing following the match in order to try and find Nia, because after that match, we finally see Skylor starting to question working alongside Chen, and she ultimately decides to work alongside the ninja and the rest of the Elemental Masters. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm pretty mixed on this. Because on the one hand, Skylor working alongside the ninja and her turning against Chen by realizing that the stuff he's been doing is wrong, that makes sense. It's the natural direction to take Skylor's character after what we saw with her throughout the events of the show, and it's something that I feel is able to fit with her. That being said, though, a problem that I have when it comes to Skylor and her becoming a good guy is her motivation for fighting against Chen, because the way the show ends up framing things, it makes it look like when it comes to Skylor, the reason why she decided to work against Chen is because of Kai. Now, I want to make it clear, Kai being a reason behind why Skylor turns to the good side isn't a bad thing. In fact, I feel like it's something that makes a lot of sense, given the big dynamic that these two had throughout the events of Season 4. Like I said, Skylor was even initially introduced as being a love interest for Kai, and as far as we know, Kai was one of the very few people to show Skylor any legitimate care or compassion at any point during her life, so it makes sense that when it comes to Skylor, Kai would be a reason behind why she turns to the good side. The issue, though, is that the way the show frames things, it makes it look like when it comes to Skylor, Kai was one of the primary reasons, if not the only reason behind why she started to turn against Chen, because when it comes to Skylor and her questioning things with working alongside Chen, this only really happens after Chen starts doing bad things to Kai. Prior to this, we saw that when it came to Skylor, she was on Chen's side and she seemingly didn't have any real issues with the stuff that he was doing. In fact, at the end of the episode, A Spy for a Spy, we even saw the two of them laughing evilly together. But then, by the end of the next episode, after Chen started doing bad stuff to Kai, that's when Skylor finally started to question things. It wasn't her realizing that the stuff that Chen was doing in general was a bad thing, with him starting up the tournament, manipulating the Elemental Masters, and trying to take over Ninjago. Again, based on the way the show frames things, it makes it look like Kai and the bad stuff that was happening to him was one of, if not the only reason behind why Skylor turned against Chen. Which to me does make Skylor's motivation for turning against Chen feel weaker than what the show was trying to go for. I feel like it would have made more sense if Kai was just a reason behind why Skylor turned against Chen, but instead Skylor's main overall reason for turning against him was because of all the bad stuff that he was doing in general. Because when it comes to the show, it feels like it's the opposite way around, and again, Kai was the main reason why Skylor turned against Chen, and all the other bad stuff that Chen was doing was just another reason, but Kai was again the main reason behind why she turned against Chen. But anyway, Skylor did end up fighting against Chen, and she was able to work alongside the other Elemental Masters, and even though she did get captured by Chen, and Chen was able to complete the ritual in order to turn himself and his followers into Anakondrai, Skylor still worked alongside the Elemental Masters, and together them and the ninja were ultimately able to defeat Chen in the Second Serpentine War. And after this happened, Kai actually offered Skylor the chance to become a ninja and join the team. However, Skylor ended up declining this, and instead she chose to run Chen's noodle business. Which, if I'm being honest, I think that was honestly a good decision, because even though Skylor's elemental powers are definitely really impressive, I feel like Skylor could have potentially become too overpowered if she did in fact become a member of the team, because she could just replicate anyone's elemental powers and any bad situation probably would have been fine. So Skylor not becoming a permanent member of the team, again, I feel like that's something that does make sense. However, that's not it, because right before Skylor leaves, we see that she attempts to give Kai a kiss, that is until Dareth interrupts, and she doesn't give Kai a kiss, and that's basically the last that we see from Skylor during Season 4. And overall, when it comes to Skylor during this season, I honestly think that the stuff that we get with her is honestly pretty solid. There were definitely a couple bumps in the road here and there, again, primarily with Skylor's motivation for turning against Chen. Again, I feel like it would have been more interesting if when it comes to Skylor, she turned against him because of all the bad stuff that he was doing in general, and again, not primarily because of stuff that was going on with Kai. But again, when it comes to the stuff that we get with Skylor during the season, I think it is honestly pretty solid, and I feel like it's able to work well during the season, again, aside from Skylor's weak motivation for turning against Chen. However, following this in later seasons, Skylor overall really wouldn't get that much to do when you really look at things. Skylor would make a return appearance during Season 5, where she had a brief cameo role talking to Ronin, but that was about it. She also returned during Season 6 as one of the ninja replacements, but once again, she didn't really get that much to do. She then made a singular episode appearance during Season 7, where she and Kai talked to each other about their parents, and I am being completely and totally honest with you guys here, but I genuinely and unironically think that when it comes to this one episode appearance that Skylor has during Season 7, I genuinely think this is the most interesting thing that the show ever did with her. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. So, at this point during Season 7, Kai had learned a lot of things about his parents, Rei and Maya, specifically with the two of them working for Chronix and Crux, and Kai not being too sure about what this means for him, because he had this really great image of his parents throughout his entire life, but now he's learned that the two of them are bad guys working for Chronix and Crux, and he's not too sure about what this means for him, and he doesn't really know how to react to having evil parents. So he goes to Skylor for advice on what to do, which is something that does make a lot of sense, given that Skylor would be able to relate to what Kai is going through, given how Chen was a bad guy. So it makes sense that Kai would end up going to Skylor for advice. And when it comes to Skylor, she's able to give Kai some legitimately really great advice. pointing out that when it comes to parents, they don't pass down their destinies, but instead they pass down their legacies, and they're the ones who are able to choose how they end up in life, not their parents and the choices that they made. Nia even points out that when it comes to Skylor, she's in the exact same position. She could have become a bad guy just like Chen and tried to take over Ninjago, but instead she didn't do that, and instead she decided to run the noodle business instead. And again, this is something that I think is honestly really interesting. The show takes Skylor being the daughter of Chen, something that was a big deal for her character back during Season 4, and incorporates it into the season in a legitimately interesting way, with Kai going to Skylor for advice on what to do about having evil parents, something that Skylor can relate to because she's been in the exact same position as Kai, and Skylor is able to give Kai some legitimately good advice, which is able to help progress his storyline during the events of Season 7. Again, I think it's something that's honestly really interesting, and again, I genuinely think this is the most interesting thing that the show ever did with Skylor, primarily because of how the show is able to incorporate Skylor being Chen's daughter into the story. That being said, though, I also want to bring up a missed opportunity here when it comes to Skylor, not for Season 7, but really more so for the show in general, and this I think is by far the biggest missed opportunity when it comes to Skylor's character, and that's Skylor being Chen's daughter being a bigger plot point. Really, Season 4 and Season 7 are the only Ninjago seasons where Skylor being the daughter of a villain is really relevant to the story. Outside of that, it's either never referenced or it's something that's only brought up in passing and isn't a big deal for the plot of the season that it's involved with. Which again, I think that's honestly a really big missed opportunity. I think it would have been really interesting if the show had delved more into the idea of Skylor being the daughter of a villain and showing us how this affects her. Because given how Skylor is the daughter of a villain, I feel like that does raise some pretty big questions when it comes to Skylor. Such as, how do the people of Ninjago view Skylor? Do they also view her as being a bad guy because of who her dad is, or do they view her differently? And did Skylor potentially have to earn the trust of the people of Ninjago and show and potentially prove to them how she's not a villain like Chen? I think it would have been really interesting if we had got something for Skylor that revolved around this, with again, her being the daughter of a villain being a bigger plot point for her during the show, but it's something that the show never really did with her, which again, I think that's honestly a really big missed opportunity. I honestly think it would have been really interesting if we got a chance to see this at some point during the show, but we never did, and Skylor being related to Chen was again really only a big deal in 2 seasons, and that was pretty much it. And so after this, once again, Skylor wouldn't really get that much going forward. Skylor would return during Season 9, and although she would have a big role during the story of the season with her getting a lot of screen time, in terms of anything big happening with Skylor's character, the show wouldn't really do that much with her overall. We would see some interesting ideas with Skylor, stuff like her being able to use multiple elemental powers at once and combining them, as well as Skylor using her powers to replicate Garmadon's powers, thus allowing her to take control of the Oni Titan, and I feel like this did lead to something legitimately interesting with Skylor because as a result of her using Garmadon's powers for so long, they ultimately poisoned her, which added more stakes to the season, because if the ninja weren't able to defeat Garmadon, that meant that Skylor was going to die, which I do think is honestly something interesting. However, again, in terms of anything big happening with Skylor's character, nothing really happened with her, as Skylor never really goes through any kind of significant storyline or character arc during the season, so for a majority of Season 9, it feels like Skylor is just kinda there, as again, it doesn't really feel like anything that significant is done with her. We also see her and Kai reuniting at the end of the season. Same thing goes for Season 10, as we see the two of them being reunited at the end of that season, but that's about it. Then, when it comes to the Wild Brain seasons, Skylor wouldn't make an appearance until the final episode of Seabound, where she had a non-speaking cameo role during the final episode as one of the attendants of Nia's funeral, and that's it. And then we get to Crystallized, where this season would do something interesting with Skylor. So initially, we see that Skylor does play a large role early on during the season, with her replicating Zane's powers in order to help keep Nia frozen while the team goes out in order to get Asphera and her scepter in order to drain Nia of her powers. However, after Nia's powers get drained, Skylor basically takes a backseat for a majority of the season. We see that Skylor is present in multiple episodes, but she never really gets anything that significant to do outside of her being involved in some cool fight scenes, and that's about it. Again, in terms of anything significant done with Skylor's character, again, not really that much is done with her. That is until the episode Compatible, where the very beginning of this episode attempted to do something interesting with Skylor, with the season doing something that I think could have been really good if executed well. And just like with a lot of interesting ideas when it came to Crystallize, barely anything was done with this, and the season basically dropped the idea almost as soon as it was introduced. So, towards the beginning of this episode, we see Kai and Skylor giving out noodles to the people at the Resistance HQ. And Kai says how the two of them make a pretty great team, and he brings up the idea of the two of them finally and officially becoming a couple. Now, you may have noticed that all throughout this video, I haven't really discussed Kai and Skylor's relationship that much. I've mentioned it a couple times here and there, but I've never really gone in depth talking about it. And the reason why is because, overall, I just don't really think there's that much to actually discuss when it comes to these two and their relationship. Now, I want to make it clear, I don't dislike Kai and Skylor's relationship, and I don't think it's bad or anything, but I'm also not necessarily a big fan of it either, primarily because I feel like there really isn't anything that interesting between these two in terms of a relationship. And when it comes to their actual relationship, the entire thing basically just boils down to Kai has romantic feelings for Skylor and he wants to get together with her. Yet Skylor seemingly doesn't reciprocate these feelings, and she seemingly only really sees Kai as a friend, and that's it. Because throughout the events of the show, we get multiple moments where it's made pretty clear that Kai does have romantic feelings for Skylor, but it's never really made clear if Skylor feels the same way about him. We do definitely get some moments of the show teasing the idea of these two potentially becoming together, like Skylor trying to give Kai a kiss at the end of season 4, or the two of them reuniting and hugging at the end of seasons 9 and 10. But again, by and large, when it comes to these two, we don't really get that much in terms of an actual relationship when it comes to these two. And the whole thing, by and large, honestly just feels pretty one-sided because, like I said, a majority of the relationship is just Kai having romantic feelings for Skylor and him wanting to be together with her, but Skylor not really reciprocating those feelings. And what's interesting is that when it comes to Crystallized, the season actually addresses this in a legitimately interesting way, because when Kai brings up the idea of the two of them becoming a couple, Skylor isn't actually for the idea. She points out how when it comes to her and Kai, they don't really interact that much. Kai hasn't talked to her all that much, and he picked a pretty bad time to actually confess his feelings for her because he decided to bring up the idea of the two of them becoming a couple during the apocalypse, even though Kai had numerous opportunities beforehand to talk about them becoming a couple. And this is something that I actually think is legitimately really interesting, because the show basically brings up the idea that when it comes to Kai and Skylor, these two as a couple arguably wouldn't really be able to work out all that well. And so I think this could have been something really interesting if, when it comes to Kai, he realized that when it comes to Skylor, although he has romantic feelings for her, she doesn't feel the same way about him. And I feel like this could have been an interesting opportunity for Kai to actually move on from Skylor and for him to get over his feelings for her. And I think this could have been something legitimately really powerful, because the show has spent a lot of time teasing the idea of these two getting together, but it's something that in the show we ultimately never really got the chance to see. And I feel like these two not getting together and Kai actually moving on from her is something that would have been legitimately really powerful. I feel like this would have been a really great message showing us that not every relationship works out. And just because you have romantic feelings for a person, that doesn't mean that other person reciprocates them, and they may only see you as a friend. But just because things don't work out with this person, that doesn't mean they won't work out with someone else. It's okay to move on and have romantic feelings for someone else. That's just a part of life. Not every relationship works out, but that's perfectly fine. Again, I think that would have been something legitimately really interesting to see, instead of what the show actually ended up giving us. Because instead of Kai getting the hint and moving on from Skylor, instead, Kai basically makes excuses as to why he hasn't been talking to Skylor, bringing up various events during the Wild Brain era, except for the island. That's the one exception, which feels kind of weird. And then Skylor says that maybe they'll talk about the idea of the two of them being a couple later, except we never actually see this at any point during Crystallize. It's something that goes completely unresolved during the season, We do see Kai and Skylor spending some more time together towards the end of the season, though, and then we get to Quest for the Lost Powers, where during Kai's story, Skylor does play a big role during the story, with Skylor being able to help Kai regain his elemental powers. And then, after 8 long years of waiting, and the show teasing us with the idea of these two getting together, Kai's storyline in Quest for the Lost Powers comes to an end with him and Skylor finally getting together, only for Dragon's Rising to then happen, and just like with a bunch of the other side characters, Dragon's Rising basically got rid of Skylor right off the bat with the merge happening, and at this point, it's not clear what exactly happened to Skylor, where she ended up, or even if she's going to make an appearance at some point during Dragon's Rising. And not only that, according to Doc Wyatt, one of the head writers of Ninjago, when he was asked about a potential update surrounding Kai and Skylor's relationship, Doc Wyatt actually said that apparently we don't actually want to know an update when it comes to Kai and Skylor's relationship, implying that something bad happened either to Kai and Skylor's relationship or Skylor herself. Which does raise the obvious question of what exactly did happen. Did these two break up at some point, or did Skylor die at some point? It's unclear, and again, apparently we don't actually want an update when it comes to these two. So that does leave things as being very confusing when it comes to Skylor and what exactly happened to her and her status when it comes to her and Kai being together. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. When it comes to Skylor over the events of the show, despite her being a fan favorite character and her being shown in many seasons with her playing a prominent role in various Ninjago seasons, it ultimately feels like Skylor by and large just didn't really get that much to do overall. Outside of the events of Season 4 and her one episode appearance in Season 7, it honestly feels like Ninjago didn't really do that much to develop Skylor's character or really do anything that significant with her. And for the most part, it felt like Skylor was primarily in the show just for her to be involved in cool fight scenes and for the show to tease the idea of her and Kai potentially getting together, only for that to ultimately happen in a book. And again, the show then basically got rid of Skylor in the very next season after this happened. Which to me, honestly, just feels kind of unsatisfying. Because again, we waited so long for this to happen, and the show even set up the idea of these two not getting together, which again, I feel like that would have been something really powerful, only for that not to happen. And at this point, we really don't know what's going on with Skylor. And again, it's entirely possible that when it comes to Skylor, she may have potentially died at some point following the merge or even during it. And honestly, I think that would be really unsatisfying. Because, again, Skylor didn't really get that much to do over the events of the show, and if she did in fact end up getting killed off at some point off screen, then again, I think that would honestly be a massive missed opportunity. I think it would honestly be legitimately really interesting if Dragon's Rising brought Skylor back and did something legitimately interesting with her character. Because even though I've been pretty negative to Skylor throughout this video, I honestly do like Skylor. I don't think she's a bad character by any means. Again, I just think that she honestly has a lot of missed potential when it comes to the show. And I feel like the show has the opportunity to do legitimately interesting things with her, primarily when it comes to her being Shen's daughter, as well as the idea of her and Kai being together and some things with their relationship, ideally with the two of them actually not getting together and the show having a powerful message about moving on. But at this point, we don't really know what's going to be going on when it comes to Skylor, or if she's even going to be showing up at some point in the future. Hopefully she does make an appearance and the show is able to do something legitimately interesting with her character, because again, for the stuff that we've gotten so far when it comes to Skylor, like I said, despite her being a popular character, it feels like Skylor really hasn't gotten that much to do overall when it comes to the show, which I do think is honestly a real shame. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys, so tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me what are your guys' thoughts when it comes to Skylor. Again, tell me down below and I hope you guys enjoy. Later guys, this is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.